Imagine waking up one morning, stepping into your backyard with a cup of coffee, and finding a massive wooden treehouse staring back at you. Not on your property, not near your property, but built directly over your fence, hanging halfway into your yard like some ugly pirate ship docked without permission. That's exactly what happened to me, thanks to my neighbor, a woman everyone in the neighborhood knew as HOA Karen. She was the self-appointed ruler of our street, the type who thought the homeowners association gave her unlimited power. She barked at kids for riding bikes too close to her driveway, scolded neighbors for leaving trash bins out for more than a few minutes, and sent out nasty emails about lawn heights. But this was a whole new level. Karen decided that her grandkids deserved a giant treehouse, and instead of building it in her own yard, she let it spill right into mine. Wooden planks hung over the fence, screws drilled through into my side, and the view from the treehouse was now directly into my bedroom window. Privacy, gone. Permission, never asked. Respect, non-existent. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes, told me it was for the children, and claimed the HOA rules were on her side. She laughed in my face when I demanded she take it down, saying I had no power to stop her. Well, she was wrong. I didn't need the HOA lawyers or long arguments. All I needed was my sprinkler system, a little patience, and the knowledge that entitled people always underestimate the quiet ones. And that's how the Battle of the Treehouse began. Saturday mornings were usually my quiet time. My ritual, what's simple: wake up early, brew a strong cup of coffee, and sit by the patio while the sun slid into the sky. The birds always seemed louder on weekends, chirping their little songs as if they knew the world slowed down. My backyard wasn't much, just a patch of grass, a couple of garden beds, and a sturdy wooden fence that had stood there long before I bought the place, but it was mine, and I loved that little slice of peace, at least until Karen came along. Karen was my next-door neighbor, and if you've never dealt with someone like her, consider yourself lucky. She wasn't just opinionated, she was obsessed with control. To her, the neighborhood was some kind of kingdom, and she was queen. Everyone else was a subject expected to obey her rules. She loved reminding people she was on the HOA board, even though, technically, she was just a volunteer who sent out monthly emails about recycling and lawn care. But in her mind, she might as well have been the sheriff, the mayor, and the president rolled into one. I had learned early on to stay polite but distant. When I first moved in, she knocked on my door with a folder of guidelines and a fake smile stretched across her face. She warned me not to park too close to her driveway, not to leave my garbage can out more than 12 hours after pickup, and not to hang cheap lights for Christmas. We like to keep things uniform around here, she said, glancing at my front yard as though she already saw flaws. I nodded, thanked her, and shut the door. From then on, we kept our distance, so when I stepped outside that Saturday morning and saw the monstrosity of wood towering over my fence, my jaw dropped so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. It was a treehouse, or at least something pretending to be one. A jumble of planks and nails stretched out from the old oak in Karen's yard, extending right over my property line. It wasn't just a lean, it was a full-blown invasion. Wooden beams jutted over my fence like ribs, and a half-built platform loomed above my garden bed, casting a shadow where sunlight used to fall. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the angle made it look like it crossed into my yard. But as I walked closer, I saw screws drilled straight through the fence, wood bolted into my side. It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. Someone had taken their sweet time hammering, sawing, and building without so much as knocking on my door. I set my mug down and just stared. My brain struggled to process the audacity. Who wakes up one day and decides, you know what, I'll just build half a treehouse on my neighbor's land. That'll be fine. Only Karen, it had to be her. As if on cue, I heard voices high-pitched and excited. 2 kids, maybe 8 or 9, scrambled up the ladder nailed into the tree. Karen's grandkids, they laughed and shouted, their sneakers thumping across the boards. Well, we can see everything from here, one yelled. And then, like salt in the wound, we can see into that house. My house, my bedroom window. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. Privacy wasn't a luxury, for MIT was sacred. And now a pair of sticky-fingered kids had a front-row seat to my life. Hey, Karen, I called over the fence, trying to keep my voice steady. A moment later, she appeared, hands on her hips, wearing that smug grin she had perfected. Oh, good morning, isn't it wonderful? The kids love it already. I gestured at the wood sticking into my yard. You built this over my fence, you didn't ask, and it's on my property. Her grin widened, like she'd been waiting for me to say that. Oh, come on, it's just a little overhang. Don't be so dramatic. It's for the children. For the children. That phrase was her shield, her excuse for anything she wanted to do. I could feel my blood pressure spiking. Karen, this isn't just an overhang. You drilled into my fence. You're damaging my property. She waved a hand like I was a fly buzzing near her ear. Your fence was old anyway. This actually makes it sturdier. You should be thanking me. Besides, the HOA won't mind. I checked the rules. That was a lie. I knew she hadn't checked anything, and even if she had, no HOA rule could possibly allow building on someone else's property. But trying to reason with Karen was like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. I took a deep breath. I need you to take it down today. Karen crossed her arms. Not happening. My grandkids deserve a play space. And you don't have kids. What do you need privacy for anyway? That one hit like a slap. As if not having kids meant I didn't deserve respect, or that my space was somehow less valuable. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Every instinct screamed to keep arguing, but I knew her type. She thrived on conflict. If I lost my cool, she'd use it against me, so I forced a smile. We'll see about that. And I turned, walked back into my house, and shut the door before she could gloat further. Inside, my coffee sat cold and forgotten on the counter. I paced the kitchen, heart pounding. I knew I had to do something, but calling the HOA felt pointless. They were more interested in paint swatches and mailbox heights than real problems. Legal action would take forever and cost a fortune. Meanwhile, Karen and her grandkids would sit in that treehouse every day, peering into my life like I was some zoo exhibit. The unfairness of it all made me want to scream. But then, slowly, an idea began to form, something small, simple, and satisfying. I glanced out the window at my yard. Right beneath the shadow of the treehouse, a row of sprinkler heads gleamed in the sunlight. My lips curled into a smile. I didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment the battle of the treehouse truly began. The following week was a blur of irritation. Every time I stepped into my backyard, there it was, the hulking wooden platform looming above like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. The treehouse wasn't just a structure, it was a constant reminder of Karen's arrogance. The sound of children's laughter, which normally might be pleasant, grated on my nerves. It wasn't the kids' fault, of course. They were just being kids. But the way they peered down into my yard, tossing candy wrappers that fluttered into my garden beds, made my home feel less like a sanctuary and more like a stage. Monday morning, I opened my blinds to find two sets of curious eyes staring right back at me from the platform. The kids waved enthusiastically, mouths full of cereal, as though watching me get ready for work was their morning entertainment. Embarrassed and furious, I yanked the blinds shut. Privacy wasn't just compromised, it was gone that night. While I sat on my porch trying to salvage a moment of peace, Karen strutted out with a watering can, humming loudly. She wore that same smug grin, and when she caught sight of me, she gave a little wave as if we were the best of neighbors. You should see their faces when they're up there, she said cheerfully, tilting her head toward the treehouse. It's like magic. Childhood memories in the making. I set my book down. Karen, we already talked about this. That treehouse is on my property. It's not just inconvenient, it's illegal. Her expression hardened for just a second before she plastered on a fake smile. Oh, don't be silly. It's hardly on your property. A few inches, maybe a foot. No one cares about those details except you. The HOA is fully supportive. I doubted that very much, but I knew better than to argue right then. Karen loved a public showdown, and she'd twist my words into a victory speech. I simply nodded once, stood, and went inside, leaving her to water her roses with the air of a queen surveying her land. On by midweek, I had already started documenting everything. Photos of the treehouse extending into my yard, pictures of screws drilled into my fence, even a video of candy wrappers raining down like confetti during one of the kids' play sessions. I knew I might need evidence, but the more I stared at those photos, the angrier I became. It wasn't just about wood and nails, it was about principle. My property was my boundary, my space, and Karen had trampled over it without hesitation. And the worst part, she acted like she was doing me a favor. Thursday evening brought a new level of disrespect. I had just gotten home from work when I heard voices outside. Karen's voice, sharp and commanding. Peeking through the window, I saw her giving a tour of the treehouse to a group of neighborhood moms. She bragged about how innovative it was, how she designed it herself, and how much better her yard looked compared to others. When one mom asked about the overhang, Karen chuckled. Oh, that. My neighbor doesn't mind. He's just quiet. Doesn't use his yard much anyway. I nearly choked on the sip of water I was drinking. Didn't mind. I had confronted her twice, and the way she dismissed me as if I were invisible, it stung more than I cared to admit. That night, lying in bed, I realized I couldn't keep letting Karen define the narrative. If she wanted to play queen, then I would have to remind her that kingdoms fall. Friday finally came, and with it, the weekly HOA meeting. Normally, I avoided these gatherings. There were endless discussions about mailbox paint colors and whether plastic flamingos should be grandfathered in as lawn ornaments. But this time, I made an appearance. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with folding chairs and a long table at the front. Karen sat near the center, surrounded by her usual clique of followers. She spotted me and raised her eyebrows as though my presence was some kind of entertainment. When the floor opened for community concerns, I stood. My heart thudded, but my voice was steady. I'd like to address a property issue. My neighbor has built a structure that extends into my yard without permission. The room shifted. A few people turned their heads toward Karen, whose smile faltered ever so slightly. I held up the photos I had printed out, laying them on the table for everyone to see. This isn't a minor encroachment. It's drilled into my fence. It affects my privacy and damages my property. Karen let out a loud, exaggerated laugh. Oh, for heaven's sake. You're making it sound like I built a castle. It's a treehouse for children. Don't we want to encourage outdoor play instead of screens? He's just overreacting. But the murmurs around the room weren't entirely in her favor. One older gentleman frowned. If it's actually on his property, that's not right. Another woman added, what about liability? If one of the kids gets hurt over there, wouldn't he be responsible? Karen's face tightened, but she recovered quickly. The HOA rules are clear. Structures under a certain height don't require approval. And as for liability, oh, please, the kids are safe. I didn't press further. I'd made my point. The room now saw what Karen had tried to hide. By the end of the meeting, the HOA decided they would review the matter, which was as close to action as they ever got. But it was enough. Karen stormed out before the closing remarks, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile floor. The next morning I expected retaliation. Karen never let anything go. Sure enough, as I stepped outside with my coffee, she appeared on her side of the fence, arms crossed, eyes blazing. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. I sipped my coffee slowly, meeting her gaze, just protecting what's mine. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. That treehouse isn't going anywhere. Get used to it. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned, walked back to my patio chair, and let her words hang in the air. Because even as she tried to intimidate me, I felt a calm certainty. Karen had shown her hand. She thought this was a game of stubbornness, a test of who could dig their heels in deeper. But what she didn't know was that I already had my countermove planned. The sprinklers sat quietly in the yard, waiting. And when the time came, they would speak louder than I ever could. The weekend came with a heavy, humid heat. By mid-morning on Saturday, the sky was bright and merciless, and my backyard baked under the sun. Normally, I would have spent a day like that indoors with the AC humming, but I had other plans. The sprinklers were my secret weapon, and I was waiting for the perfect chance to use them. It didn't take long. By late morning, Karen's grandkids were back in the treehouse, their voices carrying across the neighborhood like a megaphone. They shrieked with laughter, stomping across the boards, rattling the beams as though testing just how much weight the thing could bear. Their little bodies darted back and forth, shadows shifting over my garden as they leaned dangerously far. Over the railing, look, I can see his grill. One of them shouted, throw the chip bag down there. Another giggled. Sure enough, a crumpled bag fluttered into my yard. I clenched my teeth. It wasn't the kids' fault. They were just following Karen's lead, learning from her entitlement, but that didn't mean I had to take it. Karen herself was outside too, reclining in a deck chair with a glass of iced tea, as if she were queen of the cul-de-sac. She had a wide-brimmed hat perched on her head and sunglasses covering her eyes. But I could still feel her smugness radiating across the fence. She thrived on pushing boundaries. Certain I would never push back, that was about to change. I strolled casually into the yard, coffee mug in hand, pretending not to notice the chaos above me. I bent near the flower bed, crouching low as though pulling weeds. My hand slid to the hidden valve box by the fence post. With a flick, I set the system to manual. A hiss, then a sputter, and suddenly the sprinklers roared to life. Jets of water burst into the air, arching high and falling directly into the path of the treehouse overhang. The kids squealed as cold water rained down, splattering across the wooden planks and spraying into their faces. One scrambled down the ladder, slipping on the wet rungs, while the other clung to the railing, shrieking, "Grandma, it's raining." Karen bolted upright in her chair, her hat slipping. "What on earth?" she barked, scrambling to her feet. The water misted her legs, leaving dark splotches across her perfectly pressed shorts. I straightened, brushing imaginary dirt off my hands, and looked up innocently. Our sprinkler system. It's set to water this side every morning at 11. Helps keep the grass green. The corner of my mouth twitched, but I kept my expression neutral. Inside, though, I was laughing. Karen stomped toward the fence, shielding her face from the spray. "Turn it off. You're soaking them." I lifted a brow. "Well, it is my yard. Anything hanging over it gets watered too. Can't exactly control where the water goes." Her sunglasses dripped with water, her voice raising an octave. "You're doing this on purpose." I tilted my head. "Funny you told the HOA. This didn't hang over my yard. Looks like it does, huh?" she sputtered, words caught between rage and disbelief. Meanwhile, her grandkids had abandoned the treehouse entirely, running circles around her, their clothes plastered to their skin. One slipped in the grass, tumbling into a puddle with a loud splash. Karen looked like she was about to combust. Finally, she snapped, "This is harassment. I'll call the HOA. I'll call the police if I have to." I folded my arms. "Call whoever you like. But if that structure is on my property, I have every right to water my lawn however I please." Her jaw dropped, then clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitch in her face. Without another word, she grabbed the kids by their wrists and dragged them inside, leaving her soggy deck chair abandoned. The sprinklers hissed on for another 15 minutes, drenching the overhanging beams until they dripped steadily. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the wood swelled darker with moisture, the edges curling just slightly under the strain. When the system shut off automatically, I picked up my coffee mug, now empty, and walked back inside. My heart raced, with adrenaline not from fear but from triumph. For the first time since this battle began, I felt like I had the upper hand. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She would stew, plot, and return with twice the venom. That evening confirmed it as the sun set. I stepped onto my porch to water the smaller potted plants. Across the fence, Karen was out again, pacing her yard with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She hissed into it in clipped tones, shooting daggers at my house every few seconds. I didn't have to hear the whole conversation to know she was trying to spin her story, painting herself as the victim, twisting reality into whatever version made her look righteous. I could almost predict her words. He's targeting children. It's unsafe. He's a danger to the community. I sighed, shaking my head. If anything, it was almost predictable. Karen couldn't handle being challenged. To her, control was oxygen, and I had just snatched it away with a flick of a sprinkler valve. Later that night, while lying in bed, I thought about the day's events. It had been satisfying, yes, but it wasn't over, not even close. That treehouse was still looming, still there, still mocking me, and Karen wasn't going to give up, not when she had an audience in the neighborhood to impress. But I wasn't giving up either. The beauty of the sprinkler system was its consistency. It didn't argue, didn't fight, didn't get angry. It just did its job every morning, every evening, like clockwork. And as long as that structure hung into my yard, it would get the same treatment as my grass. The war hadn't been won, but the first battle had. And for once, I didn't feel like the quiet neighbor Karen could push around. I felt like the one holding the hose while she scrambled in the flood. The following days were tense, like the air before a storm. After the sprinkler incident, I knew Karen wouldn't just let it go. She wasn't wired that way. For her, life was about winning, about crushing anyone who dared challenge her throne as neighborhood queen. And now, I had embarrassed her, soaked her grandkids, ruined her bragging rights, and, worst of all, proved she wasn't untouchable. By Monday morning, the first strike landed. When I stepped outside to grab the newspaper, a bright yellow envelope was pinned to my front door. HOA violation notice. My stomach twisted as I tore it open. Dear resident, it began. It has come to our attention that your sprinkler system is causing a disturbance to neighboring property. You are hereby required to adjust your system to prevent future incidents. I read it twice, almost laughing. A disturbance. My sprinklers had been there for years, quietly keeping my lawn alive, but now, apparently, they were a menace to the community. I didn't need to guess who had filed the complaint. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. She probably typed it herself before sending it to the HOA board. That evening, I attended the follow-up meeting. Karen was already there, sitting tall, her folder of evidence perched on her lap like a prized possession. She spoke first, her voice carrying that false sweetness she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. The sprinklers are a hazard, she said, flipping through her papers dramatically. They spray directly onto my grandchildren while they're in their treehouse. It's malicious. He's targeting children and it's unsafe. I demand immediate action. A few board members nodded, though half-heartedly. One cleared his throat. Karen, the question isn't the sprinklers. The real issue seems to be the placement of your structure. If it's on his property, Karen cut him off, her voice rising. It is not on his property. It's a shared boundary, and I measured. Besides, children need safe spaces to play. Isn't that what a neighborhood is for? He doesn't even have kids. He wouldn't understand. The room shifted uncomfortably at her jab. I sat back, calm, waiting for my turn. When it came, I simply laid the photos on the table, the screws drilled through my fence, the beams jutting over my yard. Evidence spoke louder than Karen's. Theatrics. This isn't about children, I said quietly. It's about boundaries. My property is being damaged. My privacy is gone. And if her grandkids get hurt while climbing into my yard, who's responsible then? Me. The murmurs favored me this time. Karen's cheeks flushed red beneath her foundation, and her smile faltered. She left the meeting early, her papers shoved angrily into her tote. I thought that might cool her down, but a DID in single quotes T.2 days later, I had a police officer at my door. He stood stiffly on the porch, hat in hand, notebook tucked under his arm. We got a call about a harassment situation, he said. Neighbor claims you're deliberately targeting her grandchildren with your sprinkler system. I almost laughed, but I caught myself. Instead, I explained calmly, even inviting him to the backyard to see the setup. I showed him how the sprinklers had been there long before the treehouse. I pointed out the overhang, the screws in my fence, the invasion of space. The officer scratched his head, clearly trying not to roll his eyes. Look, sir, nothing illegal about watering your own yard. As far as I can see, this is a civil dispute. If she wants to push it further, she'll have to take it to court. Doesn't mean you can't keep doing what you're doing. Relief washed over me, though I kept my face neutral. Understood, officer, appreciate your time, and he left. I noticed Karen standing at her window, arms crossed, glaring daggers at me. Her face was pale with fury, lips pressed into a tight line. She had thrown the book at me. HOA, police, and both times. I had walked away untouched, but she wasn't done yet. By the weekend she escalated again. I came home Saturday afternoon to find a handwritten note shoved into my mailbox. The handwriting was unmistakable, large, loopy, and underlined 3 times where she wanted to emphasize her anger. "You are destroying this neighborhood. Everyone is talking about your behavior. You will regret this if you don't stop harassing me and my family. Consider this your final warning." No signature, but she didn't need one. The venom in the words dripped with her tone. I folded the note and set it on the counter, shaking my head. Karen thought intimidation would work, but it only made me more determined. Every move she made only deepened her trap. She was drawing attention not to me, but to herself, her arrogance, her lies, her refusal to admit fault. That night, as I sat on my porch with a drink in hand, I stared up at the treehouse. The beams sagged ever so slightly, swollen from days of soaking. The wood had begun to warp, dark water stains creeping across its surface. Nails protruded awkwardly where the boards had shifted. It wouldn't be long before gravity and moisture teamed up to finish the job. Karen didn't know it yet, but her empire was rotting from the inside out. The kids climbed into it the next morning, but their laughter didn't last. They slipped on the damp planks, squealing as they scrambled back down. Their grandmother scolded them for being clumsy, never once acknowledging the state of the treehouse itself and me. I simply turned on the sprinklers again, sitting back with my coffee as the jets hissed and sprayed. The water arced high, soaking the wood, splattering across the beams, dripping steadily down the ladder. Karen came out, shouting, her voice hoarse from days of rage, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was letting her fight herself, and in battles like that, the entitled always lose. By the time the 5th week rolled around, the treehouse had transformed from Karen's pride and joy into a warped skeleton of its former self. The once smooth wooden planks now sagged under the weight of absorbed water, their color darkened to a dull, sickly brown. Nails jutted out at odd angles, rust creeping along their edges. Every morning and evening my sprinklers sprayed faithfully, soaking not just my grass but the entire underside of Karen's construction. What had started as a quiet act of resistance was now a daily ritual, one that turned the treehouse into an accidental science experiment in wood rot. The kids weren't enjoying it anymore. Their laughter had dimmed to whines and complaints about slippery boards and splinters. More often than not, they stayed inside while Karen stood guard in her yard, glaring at me like a general refusing to concede defeat even as her army deserted her. She muttered under her breath when I stepped outside, sometimes loud enough for me to hear words like criminal, harassment, or loner, but I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Nature and patience were handling everything for me. On a hot Saturday afternoon, the neighborhood gathered for a block party. It was the annual event where kids raced their bikes down the street, grills smoked with hamburgers, and everyone pretended we lived in the perfect suburban dream. Karen, of course, showed up with her head held high, grandkids in tow. As if nothing were amiss, she boasted loudly about her treehouse, ignoring the whispers of neighbors who had seen it droop and sag like a tired old barn. But fate has a way of timing things perfectly. Around 4 o'clock, as people drifted back to their homes, Karen's grandkids begged to climb the treehouse. Karen encouraged them, wanting to show off, insisting the structure was perfectly sturdy. The kids clambered up the ladder, squealing with excitement. A few neighbors, including myself, lingered nearby, curious to see what would happen. Wood groaned as soon as the children stepped onto the platform. The sound was deep, unsettling, like a warning bell. One boy leaned over the railing to shout, "I can see into his yard again." Karen clapped her hands proudly, as if this were some great achievement. Then it happened. The saturated beams gave way with a sharp crack, followed by the sickening splinter of wood snapping under pressure. The platform lurched to one side, the railing collapsed, and the entire structure tipped downward. The kids screamed, scrambling for the ladder as the treehouse crashed against the fence, sending shards of wood raining into my garden. Thankfully, they made it down in time, landing in the grass with wide eyes and trembling legs. The neighborhood froze. Everyone turned to look at Karen, who stood pale and speechless, her perfect composure crumbling like the boards of her fallen kingdom. For once, she had no words, no excuses, no one to blame but herself. I stepped forward, calm as ever. "Looks like the sprinklers weren't the problem after all," I said softly, loud enough for the watching crowd to hear. "Watering my own yard isn't harassment, but building over someone else's fence, that's the real hazard." Karen's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Her cheeks flushed crimson as neighbors shook their heads, whispering among themselves. The illusion of her authority was shattered in that moment. She wasn't the queen of the block anymore, just a stubborn woman whose pride had literally collapsed in front of everyone by evening. The remains of the treehouse lay in a soggy heap on her lawn. The kids refused to go near it, and the neighbors avoided her like a bad smell. For the first time since I'd moved in, my yard was quiet, peaceful, and mine again. Over the next few days, Karen tried to save face. She muttered about faulty wood and defective tools, but no one bought it. The story had already spread how she ignored boundaries, how her arrogance backfired, how her mighty treehouse met its end not with a bang but with a slow, steady drip of water. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't rub it in. I just sat on my porch with my morning coffee, watching the sun rise over a yard that felt like home again. The fence was scarred, yes, but it stood tall, just like me. In the end, I hadn't needed lawyers or HOA votes. I hadn't needed shouting matches or fists. All it took was patience, a little strategy, and the steady hiss of sprinklers doing their job. Karen had built her throne on shaky ground. I had simply let gravity and water remind her of the truth. And with that, the battle of the treehouse was over.